Good morning, everybody. Welcome to episode 3 of the XRPodcast. Again, my name is James Herby. I'm your host for this episode. Again, if you would like to follow us on social media, you can connect with us on Twitter at podcastxrp. You can also connect to us via email at podcastxrp@gmail.com. I'd like to thank all of the listeners and subscribers who have sent in very kind words about our podcast. I want to just take a moment to again thank everybody for taking the time to listen and better educate yourself about XRP and the ecosystem it's currently developing. Today we are going to talk about two major software products that Ripple offers, and they are XCurrent and XRapid. We're going to discuss what they are, what use case they are, and what problem they are designed to solve. We will also talk a little bit about RippleNet, what that is, and provide a little more detail about how the network of Ripple's partners is set up to use their software products. So with that, we're just going to go ahead and hop right in, and I hope you enjoy the listen. So let's go ahead and move forward. To start, it would be helpful to take a little bit of time to explain to some of our listeners who do not have a background in finance or in banking to give a better idea about how cross-border or international payments are processed for the most part in our current banking system. Now, if you hear me use the term legacy system, if you're not familiar with that term legacy, that means a system that's older, that's either being modified or replaced. And in many instances, what we're going to see is that the software and the technology from Ripple is designed to do both. There will be some network systems, some ledgers that Ripple's software may be a complement as sort of an update. We also will have instances where the Ripple products will be a brand new system. And a lot of times you're going to hear reference to a banking system called SWIFT. If you're not familiar with what SWIFT is the current messaging system used by banks to process payments, international and some others, that has been in use since the 1970s. And the SWIFT system is basically just a messaging system. A quick example. Let's say that you bank with Bank of America here in the United States, and you want to send money to your relative in Quebec who banks with Royal Bank of Canada or RBC. All right. So if you want to send money from here to your relative in Canada, your originating bank, which in this case is Bank of America, they send a message with what are called settlement instructions, which are basically the terms of the money that you're sending over. Like, I'm sending $1,000 to relative in Canada. Now that message is sent over the SWIFT system, and it goes through a what's called a correspondent, which is basically like a translator or a middleman between your bank and, in this case, your relative's bank in Canada or the RBC. So what happens is that your transaction, when it starts at Bank of America, it's sent in the form of a message over the SWIFT system, and it's received at your relative's bank in Canada, typically in about 1 to 2 business days. The reason for that is that the SWIFT network still involves a lot of delay time in terms of confirming the terms of the transaction. They call them, again, the settlement instructions. And the process requires the beneficiary bank, which is in this case is the Royal Bank of Canada, the bank that's receiving the money. They also have to send back a second message over SWIFT to confirm the transaction back to Bank of America. So in this example, and it's getting a little wordy here, but the main thing to take away is that over SWIFT, to process an international transaction, your transaction has to start at your bank, go through the banking messaging system, be received by the international bank, and then sent back. These transactions to process typically right now takes about 2 to 4, or even 5 business days. The problem with that is that there's really no control over the tracking or the status of the transaction. Also, a lot of times you have some uncertain fees because you're not entirely sure how long that transaction might be taking place. A lot of these are variables that can fall outside of our control and kind of show in a world that we're in now how technology is becoming more wireless, and that goes with that. We've talked briefly now about the process of taking an international transaction in current legacy systems over Swift. I want to take a moment now to talk about another financial concept that is very common today when we're talking about international finance and payment transactions, and that is what's called Nostro Vostro accounts. Nostro Vostro. This is a very important concept because it ties into XRapid, which is one of Ripple's flagship software products. And you really can't understand the problem that XRapid is aimed to fix without understanding Nostro Vostro accounts. That's a Nostro Vostro is Latin words that mean yours and ours. And basically, this is what a Nostro Vostro account is. Let's go back to our example before involving Bank of America and the Royal Bank of Canada, RBC. Now, when money is sent internationally between those two banks at the moment, they have an existing relationship where they have done business together in the past. But in the current method of doing international transactions, each bank is required to keep on deposit at the other bank money. The amounts that each bank keeps on reserve at each other's location really depends on the agreement between the banks, but it's generally a percentage of the total volume that the two banks transact in. So let's say that Royal Bank of Canada and Bank of America do $10 million of international transactions between each other in a month. Well, they may have an agreement that requires them to keep, a percentage of that amount in reserve on deposit at each bank. That setup is designed to always make sure that all transactions are paid off. So as a system for maybe 20, 30, 40 years ago, before we had wireless and instantaneous technology, that would have been okay. But I want to take a moment so that we understand what the problems are with that way of coding. So we can see that the current way of doing these international transactions requires these pre-funded relationships between banks doing business across borders. So there's a few problems that you can see with the current setup. Number one are the costs to keep accounts at all the banks you're doing transactions with internationally. Going along with that, piggybacking that, you also have to worry about honoring all compliance requirements that you're going to have in each of the jurisdictions that you're doing business in. So there's definitely a cost in manpower and legal work to make sure that those are all being abided by. You also have the problem of just having trapped money. A lot of times you'll see the term trapped capital. All that money that's sitting in these reserve accounts at lending institutions and banks. That's a very significant amount of money. The conservative estimate is that that's in the trillions of dollars. That's a lot of money sitting on the sidelines, really just because it is a safety net for international payments. And then a lot of times you don't have the traffic over that type of technology also, which causes delays in speed and processing. let's talk a little bit about RippleNet, what that is and what it is designed to do. As we're kind of getting in now into more of the formal products from Ripple and talking more about the ecosystem, we need to talk about the main components of that. RippleNet is the network that is used for all financial institutions that use Ripple's products. So if you use anything like XCurrent, XRapid, or any of the other software items that Ripple offers in its suite of products, when you connect to their software, you are connecting to RippleNet. That is the network of all the financial institutions, all the entities that use Ripple's software products. Now, when we're talking about the structure of RippleNet, it's important to remember that every bank that is connecting to RippleNet maintains their own ledgers. They maintain their own databases. They maintain their own data privacy. It's only by connecting into the RippleNet network that banks are making that connection between their information and the Ripple network. So, we've talked about ledgers. If you forget what a ledger is basically just an online or an electronic record of all transactions in a bank. So every bank, has their own ledger. Wells Fargo, Bank of America, pick any large financial institution. They will have their own internal financial structure that logs transactions and things like that. Now, RippleNet is, we said, it's one network for all banks to be able to tap into to conduct transactions using XCurrent and XRapid. So the question becomes, well, how does RippleNet deal with all of these different networks that each individual bank brings to their connection? And the answer to that is what's called interledger. INTER ledger, interledger. Now, interledger is a very important concept to understand. Interledger is a ledger that allows all types of existing enterprise and public ledgers to connect and coordinate data with each other. I'm not going to get into the tech is way above my head, but the concept is important to understand that by having the ability to connect any new or legacy network at a bank, what Interledger does is it serves as the translator, the intermediary for all of these standalone banks to communicate with each other over RippleNet. So the network structure itself is called RippleNet, but underlying the technology and the product that allows each bank to communicate with each other is called Interledger. And again, it's important to understand that each bank maintains their own data, their own privacy, their own ledgers, but it's through their connecting into RippleNet through the Ripple software that they obviously have access to. That's how banks communicate with each other. Okay, so that's when we talk about interledger. That's what that does. So let's move on now and talk a little bit about XCurrent. Now that we're discussing XCurrent, I'm going to again refer back to the example I used earlier in this episode. We were talking about international banking transactions between Bank of America and Royal Bank of Canada. I'm just going to use those two as our example banks while we're talking about XCurrent here in this segment. So remember that we're talking about the process of sending a transaction internationally across borders from Bank of America to Royal Bank of Canada. It was a very slow process. We talked about the reason for that is that, number one, is that we're using a messaging system that is only one direction. That means a transaction starts with our originating bank, Bank of America. It goes through a processor, goes over to Royal Bank of Canada for settlement, and then you need to go back from Royal Bank of Canada needs to send the confirmation back to B of A for that transaction to be completed. Again, it's a very time-consuming process. The reason is you can never really tell what are the hours of business operation where your bank might be open. There's a lot of problems as far as not just the speed or lack of, but it's inefficient. We talked about problems with not being able to track payments sometimes. So XCurrent is designed to take care of that concern. So what does it do? So XCurrent is a software that allows the two banks to settle their transactions in real time. So, XCurrent is a financial conversion software product. So it is tracking payments and conversion rates 24/7. So you don't have to worry about things, older ways of doing business like business hours and overnights and things like that. We're in a 24/7, 365 global economy now, and XCurrent is a software product that allows international transactions between fiat currencies to be done in real time. So the only requirements to be able to do a transaction using XCurrent is that each bank, both the sending and the receiving bank, need to be a member of RippleNet and a client of Ripple's as far as using the XCurrent software. And what it allows you to do now is the banks can now send transaction instructions across XCurrent bidirectionally. That means that you don't have to have one side confirm before the other. Each side, because we're talking real-time transactions, you already know what the terms of and the costs of your transactions are before you initiate it. That's one key difference between legacy transactions and XCurrent transactions. It also reduces a lot of costs because you have better tracking. You have transparency to be able to track payments and the status of payments. And you don't have to worry about going back and dealing with error resolution, which Swift right now has an error rate of about 5 or 6%. That's crazy. That means out of every 20 transactions, there's one that has to be reviewed and rehabbed. That's an error rate that can't survive in modern technology. So when we're talking about XCurrent, okay, it is a replacement, or it's designed to be a replacement for the Swift messaging system. Okay, we talked about Swift. Okay, so XCurrent is designed to take over the functions of Swift. It is still a messaging system, but the features of it are really threefold. One, it's bidirectional with determined settlement instructions. That means that both parties know the terms of each transaction before they even initiate it. So that's one. Two is the speed. We don't have to worry about business hours or anything else like that anymore. We don't have to worry about 2 to 4 business days. We settle our payments in real time. And the third is a lower cost. By having a much higher certainty rate in terms of confirmed transactions, the error rate and the resolution costs that come with doing business over the Swift network are eliminated. So you can see a lot of the benefits in using XCurrent. Okay, let's circle back for a few minutes and wrap up our episode today by talking about XRapid and what it's designed to do. We talked earlier in this episode about Nostro Vostro accounts. If you recall, these are the accounts that banks put on deposit at their international cross-border banking partners. And these are designed to keep some monies available to make sure that transactions are settled in the proper way. So the use case for XRapid is to instantaneously settle cross-border international fiat transactions. So an example transaction would be, let's say we are here in the United States, and we go to our local bank, or we use our local U.S. bank to send money to Mexico. So what we would do is, using XRapid, our bank would purchase XRP from the preferred exchange used within the Ripple ecosystem. Here in the United States, I know Bittrex is one that is currently in the XRapid ecosystem. So our bank would use Bittrex to buy XRP. Then our exchange sends that XRP to another exchange used by the recipient bank. It could be Bittrex or Binance or another exchange that's out there. And then the recipient's exchange instantaneously converts that same XRP into their local fiat currency. This eliminates the need for the messaging. The one-way messaging system in the current system is replaced. It also allows for each bank to no longer have to keep in reserve these Nostro Vostro accounts. So it frees up a lot of money for other investment and transaction types. So in addition to freeing up this capital that's on deposit at all these banks, XRapid also speeds up the process to settle cross-border transactions. The average time for an XRapid transaction is 2 to 3 minutes versus the 2 to 3 or 4 business days that the current SWIFT system requires you to do. So XRapid, again, it's designed to eliminate Nostro Vostro accounts and speed up the time. And as long as you have an account with a bank that works with one of the preferred XRapid exchanges, then these types of transactions can be done anytime. Now, this week was a big milestone because the first Ripple partner was a bank called Euro Exim Bank. They were the first bank to go live with XRapid. So this is a software product that now is live and is currently gaining a foothold in the banking industry. So you will see XRapid a lot in news and press releases, but this is the key software product, the key tool to add liquidity and value to the XRP token itself. Without XRapid, I don't think you would ever see a large utility increase like you will once some of the Ripple partners are actively using XRapid in all their cross-border transactions. So we're just going to go ahead and use that as our wrapping up point today for episode 3. Again, just for a quick review, we talked about RippleNet, what that is, and how it's structured. We talked about XCurrent and the Swift messaging system and how XCurrent is designed to replace that. And then we talked about XRapid and Nostro Vostro accounts, how XRapid is designed to eliminate the deposit requirements that banks do cross borders and to speed up cross-border transactions into instantaneous real time. So again, I'd like to thank everybody for listening today. This was episode 3 of the XRP podcast. Again, if you'd like to connect with us on social media, you can do so on Twitter at podcastxrp, or you can also do so through email at podcastxrp@gmail.com. If you have a question that you'd like to have us discuss here on the XRP podcast, please do so. And next time we will be talking about Ripple's financial partners and looking at some of the banks that are actually piloting and leading the way in terms of Ripple's products achieving adoption and utility. So thanks again for listening. This is James Herby for the XRP podcast. We will see you next time.